Hey everybody, Chris White with the American Battlefield Trust. I'm standing here at Fort Negley. I got Chris Mackowski behind the camera. I've got Garry Adelman who'll be coming on with me here in just a minute. And Fort Negley is a really cool site here in Nashville, Tennessee. You can probably see the spires of the city behind me. We're overlooking the Cumberland River. We're overlooking the state capital of Tennessee. So really neat place to come to. Music City is a great stop for any Civil War enthusiast. So standing up here in Fort Negley, how do we get here in 1862-63? Very quickly, let's do a quick rundown of how the state capital of Nashville falls, or the state capital of Tennessee. So in early 1862, Andrew Foote and Ulysses S. Grant are going to start moving down the Cumberland and the Tennessee rivers. They will take Forts Henry and Donelson. Fort Henry's on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson's on the Cumberland River. By opening up the Cumberland River, that will open up navigation right to the city behind me, and that is Nashville. Nashville is a rail center. It's a Confederate state capital. Symbolism, let alone the rail line in here, will make it very, very important. So coming down through here will be troops under Don Carlos Buell. Buell will take the city, and now Nashville, the first state capital of a Confederate state, will fall into Union hands and stay that way throughout the rest of the war. Now, because we've taken the state capital and we're behind enemy lines essentially, and we're moving that front line, what do we have to do? We have to consolidate our position. And they'll do that by building a 7-mile or so defensive line around Nashville. One key component of this line is Fort Negley. Fort Negley is named after James Negley, a Pittsburgh native. He's not a West Pointer. He served in the Mexican-American War. He serves throughout the American Civil War. But Fort Negley is an impressive stone fort. So if we usually think about the Petersburg siege lines, or we think about the lines around Washington, D.C. or Richmond, we don't see too many stone forts. We might see them in the revetments, we might see them in other places, but we really don't see a stone fort. And you can see right behind me, this is what Fort Negley looks like. It cost about $130,000 at the time to construct this fort high above Nashville. They built it with about 63,000 cubic square feet of stone, bringing it up on top of this hill. This fort will be built by contrabands who are being freed. Newly self-emancipated folks who have come out from the plantations around here have congregated in and around Nashville, and now they are going to be put to work in building this fort. Now the fort itself is about 2 football fields in size and width, and about 1 football field long. It has a star shape on each end, a semi-star shape, because that is going to create our bastions and our interlocking fields of fire. We're taking this thing straight out of the book of Sebastian Vauban, who is Louis XIV's chief engineer, and that's where we learned a lot of our engineering ideas in the 1600s. They came about in the 1600s. We bring them over here. We kind of steal the French book, rewrite it, and we teach our West Point officers who become engineers how to build forts like this using the Vaughanian system. In fact, most Civil War engineers know how to build a fort. They don't know how to attack a fort. If you read the manual, and both sides are using the same exact manual, about 12 and a half chapters of the book tell you how to build one. About 1 chapter tells you how to attack a fort. So if you're wondering why these things sometimes don't easily fall, well, they know how to build them, don't know how to take them. But this is a very impressive fort along about a 7-mile line of fortifications that will defend Nashville throughout the war. Now, Nashville will become important again in 1864, but before we get there, I want to bring on Garry Adelman, Chief Historian of the American Battlefield Trust, to talk a little bit more about Fort Negley.
All right, thanks so much, Chris. Thanks, Chris, behind the camera. And yes, we will get back to battle stuff, but this seems like a good time to address some of the other history of the area around Fort Negley, because, you know, this is 1863. The fort is built in late 1862. It's 1863, and what happens in 1863? The Emancipation Proclamation. And even if you're not in an area where the Emancipation Proclamation applies, if you are a slave, if you're an enslaved person, you might leave and self-emancipate. That's what Chris meant by that. And many of these people who had done so are going to be impressed, volunteer or otherwise, to build all these fortifications around Nashville, including Fort Negley. I think there's a total of some 23 fortifications built in part by African-American labor here. Now, when you have this many people gathering around here, you eventually need a place for, these contrabands to stay. These people are going to live at the foot of Fort Negley in a contraband camp. And in contraband camps, sometimes you have all sorts of services. People need to be taught who didn't know how to read before. They need to learn how to handle their own money and all sorts of services. So you have, everything that humans need to live in these contraband camps, including things like cemeteries. Now, this fort eventually fell into ruin. It was left as a ruin for more than a century. But in the meantime, this community formed by the contraband camp, the Bass Street community, continued. And we still have descendants from African-American descendants from the Bass Street community, and this contraband camp still living in the vicinity. Eventually, around 2004, local groups got together and restored Fort Negley and reopened it to the public. So this is a great thing. And we love that there's all sorts of other development and commercial enterprises around here, but we don't like it everywhere. For instance, we have this great site, and the site of the contraband camp and maybe some of their cemetery, a lot of that is still preserved. It's the only contraband camp around this whole vicinity that is not yet completely destroyed. And unfortunately, the Adventure Science Center, off in the distance there, wants to build an arboretum, not only on the site of part of the contraband camp, but right on the site where good evidence points to some African-American burials. We don't have anything against arboretums, but there's an arboretum in the Nashville City Cemetery right nearby. There's an arboretum at Vanderbilt University. We just don't want it right there on this important site. The local black community opposes this maneuver. The preservation community, not surprisingly, also opposes this maneuver. So we hope they'll end up doing the right thing, and we hope you feel that way as well. Having done this, there's a lot going on in the war still. Emancipation doesn't slow down the war very much, so the war continues, and it returns to Nashville in 1864, where Chris will pick up the story.
Come on, Chris, let's take a walk. We're going to head over to another portion of the fort just to give you an idea of what it looks like. But Nashville, as you're seeing behind me over my left shoulder, Nashville becomes important again in December of 1864. What's going on right now? Well, in December of 1864, John Bell Hood has moved his army up out of northern Alabama, his Army of Tennessee, up out of northern Alabama with the intention of drawing Union forces away from the Eastern Theater, as well as that march to the sea that William T. Sherman had undertaken, and try to draw some of those Union forces off in this direction. Essentially, take Nashville back, bring it back into Confederate hands. Move up into maybe Ohio, maybe into Kentucky, maybe take the war back to the enemy. I mean, it's a far-fetched scheme in some ways, but John Bell Hood and the Confederacy are right up against the wall at this point. They have to try something. Was it the right move? That's for you to decide. But in the end, not to give the story away too soon, it doesn't go well for the Confederates. But John Bell Hood will move up out of northern Alabama. He will start moving through middle Tennessee. He will approach Spring Hill on November 29th, 1864, where he is unable to block the road north into Franklin. Franklin's about 18 miles to the south of Nashville. It's the next city down the road. And as they're unable to block this road, John Bell Hood, or they're unable to block the Union forces from getting into Franklin, the Union forces under John Schofield get into Franklin, get in there tight as a tick, as our friend Parker Hills would say, or tight as a tick on a dog's back. And then John Bell Hood, on the evening of November 30th, 1864, will make massive frontal assaults. He's unable to dislodge Schofield's men. Schofield is not going to stay in Franklin. He's coming back here to Nashville, which is under the command of George Henry Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. George Henry Thomas has, some advantages. The fact that he has some interior lines he's working on. He also has a 7-mile line of fortifications. What he does not have are a lot of soldiers initially to defend this line. Remember, Ulysses S. Grant is going to strip the backwater of his war effort and send men forward to keep carrying forward his army in Virginia, his army group in Virginia, as well as through Georgia and other parts of the Southern Confederacy. Well, George Henry Thomas finally gets about 60,000 men, a hodgepodge force, puts them together here around Nashville, and he is going to have to wait out Mother Nature. Mother Nature is angrily going to throw an ice storm and a snowstorm at George Henry Thomas while he has the president on his back, Ulysses S. Grant on his back, saying attack, attack, attack. Finally, on December the 15th, George Henry Thomas is going to launch an assault from the Nashville works. He's going to make a big swing with his right hook and try to smash the Confederates on their left. And this is going to initiate a 2-day battle, December 15th and 16th, 1864, and this is what is going to finally secure Nashville from that Confederate threat. And this is what is going to cripple John Bell Hood's army once and for all. Gary, anything to add?
Yeah, just this idea that, for those of you who think, ooh, I forgot my hat. For those of you who think that John Bell Hood's plan was just completely crazy, remember when he was starting to move up and he got slowed down by a lack of supplies, there's 8,000 Union soldiers here. What if he could have dealt with Schofield on the way? That's 25, 30,000 fewer soldiers he's going to have to contend with. What if A.J. Smith didn't arrive with 10,000 more? What if they hadn't been able to assemble 12,000 cavalry? Maybe, just maybe, John Bell Hood could pull this off. So just consider that at least as you go to be able to assess what you think of all this. It looks like, I can't tell, is Chris Mackowski coming over here from behind the camera?
I'm just really kind of putting all these pieces together as I've been filming and listening to Gary and listening to Chris, and lots of great information and processing everything we've seen so far on this fantastic trip, which, by the way, thank you for supporting. I'm seeing all these pieces come together. We talked about the fall of Fort Donelson and how that opens up the river to allow the fall of the capital of Nashville. We're going to see ripples of that because Governor Ishmael Harris is going to leave and go hang out with Albert Sidney Johnston, and we talked about that down at the Battle of Shiloh, specifically at Johnston's wounding. But then Nashville becomes that central part that Chris has talked about, where it's this forward supply base. We went down to Stones River and talked a lot about Rosecrans down there and some of the issues he has, and he's drawing on these supplies from Nashville to help him out. And then after he is battered so badly at the Battle of Stones River, it's going to take him months to then rebuild his army and rebuild his supplies. And again, Nashville is really important because he's got to draw supplies, get him ready so that he can head through the Barrens, as Chris talked about. So I'm just saying all these really cool puzzle pieces come together, and hopefully as you've been watching these videos, you've seen the puzzle pieces come together too, because as I've been connecting these dots, thanks to Chris, thanks to Gary, thanks to all our historians we've been talking to, I'm connecting those dots and seeing a really fascinating picture come together.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris. So if you think of it, Nashville falls, then you're going to move down to Murfreesboro, which is about 32 miles to the southeast of here. Then you're going to move down to Tullahoma. Then you're going to move down to Chattanooga, and eventually down to Atlanta, Savannah, and then north up in through the Carolinas. So this is really the key part, the key component. The falls of Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, and then the capture of Nashville in February of 1862 ultimately set up the federal victory in 1865. This is the long game. A lot of people always want those quick hitting wins. It's like the NFL today. Everybody wants a quarterback who throws for 5 touchdowns and 7,000 yards in a game. That is not the way war is executed. And this is what you're going to start to see here in the Western Theater. And this is really where the war is won and lost in the West. This is where the foundation of the Southern Confederacy is going to crumble, taking out the knees of Robert E. Lee in the East, as well as President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis. And if you want to, get out here to Nashville. We're going to go visit a couple other sites. We're going to go to Redoubt 1. We're going to go to Shies Hill. We're going to take you all around some of the Nashville sites. Some people say that Nashville is lost, or Civil War Nashville is lost, but you can come out to places like Fort Negley, and this is a beautiful site to come out to, get a panoramic view all around 360 of this city, and you can check out one of the coolest Civil War fortifications. This is a rare fortification that you will see here. This fortification itself is something that you're not going to find in the East, and this is one of the gems of the Western Theater, named after a fellow Pittsburgher, James Negley, of course. But this will be a great place to come. No battle is fought here at Fort Negley. That's important. But this will be an integral part of the inner defenses here at Nashville in case it was ever threatened like it was in December of 1864. So on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust, I want to thank Garry Adelman and Chris Mackowski, who are both behind the camera. In fact, all three of us were cameramen. We were the craft services. We were everything for this, directors, producers. So I want to thank you for watching. We want to ask you to hit that subscribe button on YouTube, share this with your friends, with your family, and thank you for supporting this trip, as well as battlefield preservation and education.